Hello. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you could turn your phones to silent, that would be fantastic. I'm going to say a couple housekeeping notes, and then we'll get right started. So first off, want to thank our sponsors, Cayman Enterprise City, Digital Cayman, and Kirk ISS. Kirk ISS is helping to stream the event online. We have about 40-ish people who are tuning in online, so that's fantastic. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions at the end, please don't hesitate to continue the conversation. We'll be open for some networking as well afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Carlos Edwards, who is our tech specialist at Cayman Enterprise City, who will be moderating tonight's discussion.
All right, thank you. All right, so welcome everyone to the State of the Cybersecurity Tech Talk. We have a few panelists here with us tonight. I'll allow them to go ahead and just introduce themselves, give us a small, brief about you.
Sure.
And companies.
Hey everyone, RJ Sudlow from Kirk ISS. I am the. Is this good? Okay. Closer. Hello. I am RJ Sudlow from Kirk ISS, IT Principal Security Engineer. I do all things security for Kirk ISS. So a lot of it is high-level design, making sure that the implementation is sound, reviewing things that have been done beforehand for safe checks and whatnot. In a previous life, I was the manager of a red teaming department at a public accounting firm in the U.S., so I was an ethical hacker by trade. So new city, I was doing a new client, trying to get root on their domain controller, show them where the holes were. And so coming here, I've moved from the offensive side to the defensive side, trying to help security and elevate the posture within Cayman. So,
thank you, RJ. Good evening, everybody. My name is Anil Sobi. I'm Information Security Specialist. I've been involved in security for almost 15 years now, so quite a while. Some of you may recognize me from my previous role as Information Security Manager at CNB. And before that, I was a security architect at DART. And before that, at Deloitte. So go quite a way back.
Hi, my name is James McGarvey. I wear a number of different hats. I'm in IT for about 20 years. I'm working in security for 4 or 5. Before that, I was a developer working on various different applications. So my day-to-day involves managing various different teams in terms of projects across a number of different industries. One of my company's focuses is a niche-focused cybersecurity company. We focus on third-party risk, vulnerability management, and detection. So thank you for having me.
All right, great. We're happy to have you guys here. Let's kick things off with a simple question here. What are some of the trends you're seeing in your own organization or on the island with clients, in adopting cybersecurity controls?
I think, big elephant in the room that we're still dealing with here. COVID has changed the way we work, the way our resources access our environments and our data, and moving to a more remote access, remote working model has brought itself a lot of inherent risks, its own challenges. We've had to, as IT departments, had to ramp up our scale of remote access for organizations, which always, again, opens us up to a number of risks here. We've seen a number of new government regulations and requirements come in. That, I think, is a major driver towards the industry maturing. It's a welcome step, but it's the first step. I think going down that road, working with the regulators, working with the government, working with statutory boards, is going to be an important part for a number of organizations here on Island.
I'll piggyback on that, and instead of reiterating everything that Anil just said, because it's my viewpoint, for me specifically, what I've seen for some of our customers is there's been an elevation in the standard of quality in the phishing emails that have been coming through. I know that there's probably been thousands of those that you guys have gotten every day. Whereas before it was almost kind of just a spray and pray and hope that you got somebody to catch on the other side. But it's being a little bit more fine-tuned now, where instead of just going to see if a credential set has been stored on a paste bin somewhere online and trying to see if they can get an access that way, they're targeting specific organizations, and the initial email isn't actually the phish. It takes them to a legitimate site. A lot of things are hosted on like Adobe Spark or a little landing page to show some form of legitimacy. And then hopefully then the user then tries to go download that document or whatever they have. Usually we're not seeing a lot that are trying to get remote access to your organization, but it's really just a simple bully tactic to try and get your data, get access to that account, and then sell that on the dark web somewhere else. So
More thing to add to that. They're starting to deviate away from standard emails now. You're seeing a lot more of the SMS and even voicemails being used as a delivery tactic. And that to me is a lot harder for the average person to identify. I mean, some of the links are off the board bad, but they're getting much more sophisticated.
Just add to that. In terms of some of the trends and what we're seeing, I think we are seeing a general improvement in people's knowledge and awareness. I think there has been a good uptake in training. I think the news, when we read and we see a lot more in the news now about ransomware, about vulnerabilities, SolarWinds, for example, was a big news story. So I think there is a better awareness. I think that has driven some of the maturity. And I think we've got better tools now as well. I think being able to generate phishing campaigns easily and good ones as well has certainly helped bring things along and mature a lot quicker.
Thank you. You mentioned training. What are some of the things that the local community and local companies can do to better train, whether that's employees or just the community in general, to safeguard their data and secure the company's information?
In terms of training, there's a myriad of resources available now online. YouTube is full of really good training, and there's also some really good training courses, some certifications out there. I think it's always that balance between work and training in terms of an employer investing in an employee, in terms of bringing them up and helping them get to a place that's both beneficial to both of them. In terms of, I think there's also room for a grassroots community here where we can make younger people aware that cybersecurity is a very good career choice and career path for them, and encourage employers to employ younger people, juniors. There's a massive gap in cybersecurity. Everyone talks about they're short so many people, but nobody wants to hire juniors. Nobody wants to bring them on. You always see jobs being posted for junior salary with 10 years experience, completely crazy stuff. So we need to actually encourage people to come into the industry, and employers need to take the risk of hiring young people and training them.
One more thing, just to add to that. I'd like to break down that into two pieces here. There's a responsibility for companies to their customers, and we're seeing them utilize more of a social media approach to try and educate, to try and work with customers as best as they can. And then internal focus training, where they're working with their employees. They're doing a lot more of the online trainings. They're doing their phishing exercises. This is an important part of it because people represent a major part of the risk to an organization. So companies who are addressing that both ways, external and internal, I think are going to be better set than the other ones that don't.
All right. So, I mean, data is a very critical part of, any security measure for an organization. Cayman has introduced a data protection law, and, SEMA has also made a statement, guidance in terms of cyber as well. What does the cybersecurity maturity level looks like for Cayman in the future?
that is a very loaded question, and there's a lot of parts to break it down, mostly because I think I wrote that question and sent it over. I think this does tie in pretty nicely, though, with what you're talking about on elevating the security levels, not only in the professional world, but also for people coming into it. And I think a lot of it is going to be organizations have their hands forced by the regulatory guidance. I know that because Cayman is a very expat-heavy locale, almost everybody has had to do some form of regulatory training as it pertains to GDPR or CCPA if you're coming from the US, and make sure that you've got things set up as it needs to be for compliance. So I think it's less of a, if we need to get to a certain point, but I think it's going to have to be there. I know there's a big focus in Cayman doing AML and anti-money laundering. And I think that's kind of driving that change, cascading all the way throughout, to where it's not just saying, okay, finance has to have their hat on and they've got to have everything buttoned up tight. IT also needs to work with there too. And how do we go back and make sure that's secured the way appropriately? By a show of hands, is anybody here from SEMA? Not that I'm calling you out. Or, okay, great, perfect. Has anybody read the statement of guidance on cybersecurity that SEMA put out? Okay, how many of you understood it the first time you read it? Ashley, there you go. So essentially what the statement of guidance is doing is it's putting the impetus from the regulators onto the customers for cybersecurity, making sure that they are doing the right steps to be protected, whether that come from a vendor due diligence standpoint or a technical and procedure standpoint. So I think to this, as far as how it's going to elevate it, realistically, organizations are going to have to either start looking towards guidance from elsewhere, or there's going to be a better tight-knit community of formats like this and forums where we can talk about what can we do as a whole in Cayman in general. Sorry if I took all of your answers.
I think yeah, excellent answer, RJ. What I would add to that is that so we've seen SEMA and how they're handling the financial regulated entities side here. And again, I'm not sure if this is in the pipeline. I'm just talking from what I've seen on the outside, but the utilities as well could probably use from that type of guidance as well. If Ofcom is going to be doing something similar to NERC CIP for our critical infrastructure, that's something I would like to see coming in the pipeline as well. I know that they had announced in September last year a national cybersecurity assessment exercise. I haven't heard any updates on that yet, but that would be a good benchmark to see where we're at in terms of our government industries or our boards and what else, and from there, how else we're going to improve.
I think it's a good step. I think the regulator, is doing the right thing and trying to encourage these companies now to take cybersecurity more seriously. I think the one size fits all approach is not going to work though. Right now we got policies, but nobody's got standards or procedures to back them up. Well, not everybody. I guess the smaller companies I'm more speaking about. I think it's a tricky one for them. I think the one size fits all approach is not going to work. I think it has to be a risk based approach, depending on the size of the company and the business that they do. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, because I think there's going to be a lot of different facets to that, and a lot of companies, big and small, are going to have very different requirements and can't all be measured in the same way.
Thank you. So we are seeing an increase in cybersecurity attacks. We're seeing regulation come into play. What can organization do for a quick win that will make a major impact?
I'll start. I think that focusing on the fundamentals is always the right place to start. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. There are certain things you can do that will immensely improve the security posture of your organization. Inventorying your assets, right? You cannot manage or protect what you don't know is in there. And we've seen Log4j and other supply chain attacks coming in where we've had to dig to really find out what's affected, what's not affected. So that may need a different level of granularity than we've had in the past, but still very, very important. Working with your people, making sure they understand their roles and responsibilities in security organization. A lot of people hand off and say it's an IT thing or compliance thing, but it's everybody's responsibility, and boards especially need to understand that they have ultimate responsibility for ensuring the security organization. So the onus is on them to really drive that from the top down approach. I think a lot of organizations too, and I know in the past I've had this problem with the patch management lifecycle. Testing and deploying patches in a relatively regular cycle. I'm sure I'm not the only person here, but I'll raise my hand and say it. It's a challenge sometimes. We've seen patches break. The patches themselves are more dangerous than some of the attackers out there. So how do you get around that? But these are the challenges we have. It's still important. You have to protect your organization, but it's not easy. But these are the steps I would take first of all to get the ball rolling.
From a smaller SME perspective, I would say training is one of the first things everybody should be doing. I mean, that solves so much for small companies in terms of lowering their risk. Multi-factor. I'm going to point out all the really obvious stuff here, and I thought Neil was going to beat me to it, so thank you for that. Multi-factor authenticating, patching is obviously a big one as well. Yeah, but for a small company, I think taking advantage of what they already have. A lot of companies have firewalls that are installed but not properly implemented. You know, they've got Office 365 or they've got G Suite, and there's a whole bunch of security tools in there that can help them. You know, they're not always implemented or not always implemented properly. You know, so I think there's a lot of things small businesses can do to help shore themselves up that are very cost effective, you know, and will increase or will lower their risk significantly, you know, without too much of an outlay.
I'll tie this up in a nice, neat bow because I think really what we're just echoing is nothing that is new and you haven't heard before. It really is just going back to the basics. And the way to do it is take the 5,000-foot view of your organization and say, what do we have? Who's in charge of it? Where does it live? And what does it do? And once you have kind of that blueprint and that map together, then you can start putting in those different silos and those protections all the way through. The thing about cybersecurity in general is the things that keep you up at night are the same kind of things that keep you up, like when you forget to do something on your to-do list. It's the things you don't know or you forget about that have been installed by a vendor when you were trialing something about 2 years ago, you didn't take it off the network, and it's still there. And so, again, having those basics, those IT policies, those procedures, even if it's just one giant IT policy and one procedure, training it with your employees and making sure they understand that it's nice that you can go to Facebook at work, but not every link that you get from somebody on Facebook needs to be clicked on your work laptop. It is really just the basics like that.
Okay. All right. Moving on. How are some of your clients or within your own organization handling cloud migration? And I'll just preference it with, you know, the fact that we are now seeing more work from home environments.
I would say overwhelmingly, in my experience, clients are handling it and other organizations are handling it the same way they go to the dentist, where they know they need to do it at some point or it's inevitable. And it's a little bit of pain on the front end to help fix things through the future. I think that ties into what we were talking about earlier, where there's proven use cases of customers successfully moving to the cloud. But the analogy is still there's when you move to the cloud, essentially they're just leasing you an empty warehouse. It's up to you to put the walls up, put the plumbing in, make sure it's insulated the right way. You've got to run your water lines all the way through. I mean, it really is up to you to make sure it's configured appropriately. So from my standpoint, that's kind of what I've spent the majority of my time working on at Kirk ISS, is working with customers to figure out those if this, then what scenario, and then making sure on the back end that those protections are put in place as they start moving to the cloud. Because again, it's the big boogeyman that you can't see when you move to the cloud. You don't know where it exists, so you can't just go pull the plug on it if something happens.
Like that dentist analogy. Yeah. Don't wait till something falls out. Yeah, it's gonna happen. We don't talk a lot about DR and business continuity here, but that's a straightforward solution for something. Like, I don't expect a lot of people to begin moving their mission critical systems right off the bat. I think that'll be the last things to go, but there are outliers that more and more organizations are going to take advantage of. We've talked about Office 365, MS Teams, even Exchange Online. These are relatively simple. There have been 100 use cases, and more people are going to go. The cost, the scale, redundancy, it's just making more and more sense. For every organization, of course, they have to balance their risk appetite, what their requirements are going to be before they just jump into the cloud bucket. It's always a bespoke solution in terms of what they were willing to entertain, what they can do, what they're willing to do. But the benefits are there. We've seen them, but the risks are there as well. So each his own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen, you know, a lot of success with people moving to the cloud for a number of different reasons. On-premise hardware is great up to a point. You have, I'd say, probably more control. You can physically touch it, but it's a lot more difficult to secure, and it's a lot more difficult to control access to. Moving to the cloud for something like SharePoint, if you want to take a very simple file example, it's given people the ability to more tightly control their data, to silo their data, to be able to put data protection in place where they can understand the flow of the data through their organization and who's accessing what where, and where that data is moving to. The work from home thing has certainly been a challenge because a lot of organizations have their silo data locked down in terms of being only accessible from their PCs and their IPs in terms of their own internal network. So that's been a challenge. But certainly overall, I think moving to the cloud has been a huge success for more organizations.
All right, thank you. All right, RJ, I have a question here for you. uh, are there concerns for data security versus data residency?
I think what I heard earlier today is that IT people don't care about data residency; they care about data security. I think it's the lawyers that usually care about data residency. Again, I was in the U.S. before I came here, so it was less of a concern about the big bad bald eagle that's going to get into the data that if they want it, because they already had it. Right, we're already in the U.S. So those concerns were things that I heard here first in Cayman, and I understand it. Right, it's the history of Cayman. It is what Cayman has built, and a lot of it is again relinquishing that control. Right, it's dropping your kid off at university or when they fly away for the first time and they're old enough to go out on their own. Some people have concerns about, they can't, it's out of their hands now. For me, I have no concerns because I'm looking at it from a utilitarian standpoint of it has to be done and implemented correctly in order to do it, and it has to go through a phased approach to make sure it is done correctly. Don't just, like you said, slap Michigan critical up there and then go on holiday for about 2 weeks. And then, I mean, you could, right? But then that's a good way to make sure that someone finds you out on holiday and they got to drag you back to the office. So for me personally, I've seen that concern and I understand it, but I think that realistically, as long as it's being done correctly and appropriately for those organizations, then it shouldn't be an issue. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
You hit the nail on the head there. I mean, like I said, it's about retaining ownership and control, and want to be able to touch their servers and hold on to it. But if you're transferring data across the net, more than likely it's going to be going across a US router, a US network anyway. So it's, how important is that to your organization? If it's a must-have, well, then you need to weigh that cost in and balance it accordingly. But to say that that's a driving factor, it really does depend on the organization themselves. For data residency and then sovereignty as well, I think, is where the jurisdiction thing comes into play. These are concerns, but like I said, we more focus on the configuration and security side of it. That's more important to me. But like I said, for each company, they have to weigh up their risk and balance it for themselves.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Residency is more about the lawyers and the IT guys, right? And it used to be a bigger question here. It used to be a bigger concern. I think now residency is very much down to the individual company and how that company is structured, and I think where to do business. And I think there may be some other requirements now in terms of having boots on the ground here. I can't remember, it's economic substance, I believe, what it is, but I think that maybe has changed things slightly. In terms of residency versus security, I think it's almost apple and oranges in a lot of cases. I think security, I think, has improved for most companies. It has improved with a move to the cloud. I think on-premise data is a lot more secure unless you've got a team behind you and they're really managing that well. I think it's far easier to move stuff to the cloud and secure it easier. I think it's far less effort. I know it's somebody else's computer, so we never really know where it is, but we kind of trust Microsoft to do it right. Or Google.
All right, thank you for that. All right, so we've talked about the state of affairs in terms of cybersecurity on the island, the different regulations and stuff like that. How do you envision the cybersecurity landscape in Cayman, let's say the next 5 years?
You guys have been here longer than I have, so.
I think what we've seen over the last few years with COVID, there's no telling when a new variant is going to emerge and how deadly that's going to be and what the impacts that's going to be. I'm really hoping we don't go back ever into lockdown, but you can't bet on that. So again, remote access is pretty much a factor that we have to consider here. And how are people going to have access to our environments and our data? I do expect to see either revised or new regulations coming into place. How stringent they will be remains to be seen, but I would see there would at least be an update. CMS regulations came out in 2020. So, I'm not saying I have any idea when, don't quote me on that, but it would make sense at some point within the next 5 years, there would be something else. I would assume touching more on cloud security and how that's going to be impacting businesses as well. We're working, Cayman's an emerging center in a number of new technologies, blockchain and fintech. A lot of it coming out of Cayman and the Caribbean in general. I wouldn't bet against certain disruptors coming into place there. In fact, 5 years, I'm sure something's going to come up here that's going to totally revamp the industry and how we take a look at our payment data, how our data is being transferred, where our data is being stored. So these are things that we'll have to keep on top of. And I'm pretty sure that ransomware and phishing attacks are not going to go away. People are going to be people, and they're still going to be vulnerable, and people are still going to be willing to take an effort to try and get their information and scam them. So that's pretty much a given constant, I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Anil. I think it's really good observations. Yeah, for the most part, I agree. I think what's interesting from a Cayman perspective is what's happening here internally. You know, there are some very interesting companies in Cayman now doing some really interesting things. You know, with a lot of blockchain, for example, happening here. I would hope to see in 5 years that we see some of the practical elements of blockchain, aside from cryptocurrency stuff, actually start to, you know, become apparent in some of the industries here. I mean, there's opportunities for registries and stuff like that to start using blockchain. It would be really great to see that happening here at a governmental level, maybe. In general terms, I don't think Cayman is too dissimilar anymore from the rest of the world. It maybe never really was from an IT perspective. You know, I think the regulation obviously is going to help drive some advancements and changes, but I think, you know, in general IT terms, we're looking at more AI, more blockchain, and you know, more ransomware, as Neil says, and more vulnerabilities every other day.
And the reason why I want to say this for the end is because, again, I'm only here since November of 2020, so I'm still relatively new on island. I am extremely optimistic about what the future of cybersecurity is going to be in Cayman, and I think a lot of that is coming from the perspective of there are, after talking with Caitlin, I think 80 plus people that are here right now or watching online that are interested in cybersecurity here and at least putting a focus on it. And I think the angle of osmosis, like you were talking about, James, with the organizations that are newer on islands and kind of how they're doing things, whether they be the Cayman office or they're incorporating for the first time in Cayman, and other organizations learning from that, and also the fintech angle. I mean, that's not going away. So for me, I am optimistic about it. I think that the one blocker will probably be that talent gap and that talent pool. So I think that's going to be something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. I know there was a great talk, a tech talk here last year, the tail end with UCCI, about kind of brainstorming some ways to train local Caymanians and, you know, draw up that local talent so it isn't always just the first option of go overseas, find somebody, bring them here, because that's 6 months, 7 months down the road. And then if they leave, then that talent and that knowledge isn't going anywhere except back with them. So I'm hopeful for it, and I think that the steps are here, and I think the building blocks are here to have it be successful.
All right, thank you for that. Let's open up to the audience for questions if anyone wants to. Oh, we have two at the front here.
Sure. I think you've got a microphone coming to you right now.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the talk. I'm curious about the left comments on blockchain and everything else we said before about phishing and attacks. What's your view on how blockchain can improve or can create more opportunities for attacks? So putting registers in blockchain, having banks running their activities, fintech and in blockchain. How do you see the future using blockchain as a tool, and how better the security will be or how worse the security will be?
I'll start with that, and only just because, James, you and I were talking about this last week. I recently have become a complete degenerate when it comes to NFTs and buying and trading them recently. And in that process, I'm looking at it from a security standpoint. I don't know who created what on the other side of the computer. I know from the standpoint that you can open your wallet and you can see that NFT and you can interact with it. James and I were talking about it briefly, and personally, what I'm doing as my own little study habit is seeing if there's a way you can weaponize those. So if an attacker decided to say, hey, you know, they put in they did the best marketing they could for an NFT rollout, and they sell it at the cheapest rate, so they get hundreds of people buying them and then spreading them all the way through. Is there a way to weaponize that? Or then that could then be, you could do remote connections, you could get access to, you know, the data, you could steal it. So I think there's an avenue there. There's a lot of different things I'd have to do before I'm ready to report my findings on that. But I think that's one of the cases of you learning to, you know, running before you can walk. And I think that blockchain as a technology is forcing us to kind of play catch up. with that. I'll add that over if anybody else has anything.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I mean, you know, we see hacks all the time, right? Crypto.com got hacked. Big, well respected, probably well audited, with some really good developers. There's no getting around it. With complexity comes vulnerabilities. You know, in terms of the local things here, I think there's blockchain. You know, outside of cryptocurrency, blockchain is just a database. It's just a really, really clever way of handling it. And that's why, you know, I would be really interested to see it implemented here at some local levels, register levels. It could handle banking. It's just a ledger at the end of the day, right? The benefits to everyone, and to me personally, what I would see is that I can have the private keys to that, and I'm the only one to access it. And I think that database of registry or bank, whatever it is, can be made public. There probably isn't the same incentive for somebody to hack that and break it because there isn't a cryptocurrency element to it. It's just a public database at that point that's encrypted. It's a great question, though. Thank you.
Well, you did mention email specifically, though. While I appreciate the blockchain, I mean, there are steps you can take with email security to at least improve the security of your email infrastructure. DKIM, SPF, those sort of things there that you can at least have a higher level of assurance of the email came from the domain that it said it came from. And those are relatively easier steps to implement now than while blockchain may be a facet of the future that we can go down. These are things that we have now, and you should be looking at these as a more viable step, even PGP, for verifying your email senders. I mean, these are things that technology we have, yeah, but still works.
Hello, and thank you for everything thus far. For a non-cybersecurity person, one of the scariest seeming threats is of large-scale server-side ransomware and having your entire infrastructure locked up by somebody with lots of publicity attendant and so forth. Do you feel, without necessarily going down into any specific products or anything, do you feel there are ways to armor yourself against that style of attack?
You mean from a user perspective or from an organization?
Organizational perspective. I'm not talking about locking up one guy's laptop. I mean,
well, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Being able to mitigate the entry channels for your ransomware, usually email, sending attachments, those sort of things there, drive-by downloads. Limiting that is a good first step. Teaching your employees and training and awareness, of course, what to click, what not to click, not to respond to certain emails if they're not sure it's legitimate. Having reliable backups that you've tested and you're sure that your backup procedure is reliable, true, and you can restore from that. And having procedures in place so your staff know how to restore from that is key. And just branching out from there, your incident response procedures for malware outbreaks. What do you do if it's running through your organization, if it's limited to 10 employees or starting to spread through a whole network? Do you have those procedures, and have you tested those procedures with your staff so they're aware? I like to draw the analogy, fire drills. A lot of organizations do fire drills once every quarter, once every 6 months, and people know what to do when they hear alarm. It's automatic to them. They follow their warden, their security champion, they go out the stairs, they muster, they record their name, but that's drilled into them. Do we do that same level of preparation for our incident response? Not every organization does that, but that's a key aspect of it as well.
I think that's how you if you end up with a scenario where you've got ransomware on your servers, you've got a lot of layers that it's already bypassed before then. And I think that kind of echoes what you were talking about. And that really just, that sentiment is that defense in depth, making sure that things are siloed appropriately and you know what those breakpoints are. So you know that, okay, if we have we've got a moat that's about 20 feet deep, we've got a big drawbridge, the castle walls are 40 feet high and they're 15 feet thick. You have to know those dimensions so you can understand where the weaknesses may be beforehand and understand when they'll break and when they won't break.
Would add zero trust into that. I mean, that's something that's definitely going to be hugely important, and Microsoft are implementing it now as well. It changes the way, because ransomware is already over the wall, right? You know, in IT we try and build these big walls around everything. Well, ransomware is already over the wall, so that's why zero trust is so important. because it shuts that down. It means that we're always least privilege, and technically, you know, if it's implemented right, then it should really mitigate the effects of ransomware happening.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Or we have a few.
I have one. From the regulated entities, especially in relation to CMASOG, what would be your recommendation for small business to satisfy pen test? Well, I wouldn't say requirement, I mean, but it kind of is.
The pen test requirement, I believe, is one performed annually. There are a number of ways you can do this. If you don't have to go the full Big Four, you know, it can be quite costly, but it's quite thorough. Again, you need to balance the risk and your organization, the size, and there are a number of smaller vendors are available around the Caribbean, and that can show that. I mean, it's important to not just do a external scan that's not really a pen test. You know, you need something a bit more thorough than that, something that's actually looking at the services you're exposing to the internet, what's in your DMZ, and if you want to do an internal one as well to get a holistic point of view, a perspective of your organization, that just adds to the contextual layers and gives you more information, so it's better for you. It can be a cost, and I know for small businesses that's every dollar counts, but this is an important exercise. It's there, it's required by them because they see the importance in knowing if a white hat can tell you this is a vulnerability that's exploitable and you need to fix it before it gets exploited, and then you need to fix it. That's a lot better for you because then you can get ahead of it, and you know your organization is better secured.
Shameless plug. I'm a pen tester here on Island. So but we at Kirk ISS do that. And so a lot of it is just it's just knowing what you don't know, right? I think part of me coming to Kirk ISS, and again, this is not a shameless plug, but it sounds like it, was to offer organizations like yourself different avenues, because usually it is cost prohibitive, right? You normally go with the Big Four, it's a couple $100 an hour, they come up with an auto-generated report, spit it out to you, and it's up to you to give management responses. And you may not have that level of detail that you want as far as understanding how does this actually impact my organization beyond that vulnerability, like you were saying, right? So yes, there are a myriad of us on Island that can do that. I'd be happy to talk with you. I'm not the sales guy, but happy to do that. He is the sales guy. Yeah, he's the sales guy.
I'm not selling pen tests today. The only thing I would add to that is have it reviewed by third party, because there are a lot of different standards of pen tests. Let's say I've seen some really bad ones and I've seen some really great ones. So your first time till you trust a company, have it reviewed by a third party.
Ask the tough questions.
Yes, scope is very important too. You want to know exactly what it is they're testing and limit them to what you need. Otherwise, they can get out of hand really, really quickly.
Do we have a few?
How can organizations and individuals protect themselves against SIM swapping attacks here? Because so far I haven't found any defense mechanism for that. And if you don't know of any, do you think that's a problem?
Have multiple SIMs. That's a difficult one to answer because it's not anything that a user or an organization for themselves per se can really do. It stems from a upstream provider. It's a tough one. I mean, you need to have, I guess, additional controls around if you're sending OTPs to your phone or anything else like that, where SIM swapping comes into play. Are you monitoring for any fraudulent access, that sort of thing? It's RJ, how do you want to solve that?
Well, I was going to say, I could feel you wanted to give the mic over to me. Unfortunately, there is no simple fix for it. There isn't. And I think that's one of those scenarios where it's going to be piecemeal security implementations that come through on the back end. I think some of it's not going to, I don't know if it's going to make a change from the hardware level, or it might be from the software level for deployment of it. A really bad analogy would be the implementation of SSL, and then over time incrementing it to get better and better to help prevent those ways of attack.
There is SIM-less phones down the line. I remember reading about that a couple of years ago. But what prompted the question? Have you seen that as an issue here on Island? Have you seen it happen? No, I've actually never seen it happen here. I haven't even had the conversation a couple of years about it.
Mostly in analytics, like usually in just a theoretical standpoint, right? I've seen stuff like that and people writing white papers on it, but I haven't seen one myself. So
Anecdotal stuff of people on Twitter. I've seen it happen too. Right.
Mm.
Right. Wow.
Mm.
Well, good. They call customer service.
And then
Have you ever called customer service here? Yeah. It'll take 3 or 4 days for that swim swap to happen. So
yeah.
I wouldn't be too worried about that. Right. Wow.
Yeah.
I think in crypto, I mean, the conversation around getting away from SMS-based two-factor has been
Yeah.
around for a long time. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even, multi-factor on the phone. I tried to go multi at this point and have email confirmations and stuff like that. I mean, if you've been in crypto long enough, you've lost some crypto somewhere, right? I know I've been burned once or twice, so you learn the hard way. It hasn't happened to him yet.
Yeah.
I keep
They
telling
don't
him,
point that out.
It's in the mail.
I just yeah. That's why he was asking about the crypto break, because he's trying to get me.
The word yet in that statement. Again, this could be a question for the providers. What are they doing on their back end to protect us as customers from these type of attacks? I mean, are they vetting employees? Are they putting those checks in place there?
Yeah. They're not going to do it. Yeah. They'll turn the SIM off if you stop paying, and then that's about it. We had no back there.
Do we have a group that regularly gets together like you guys and tracks this? Other by industry or by a region, and they start to see patterns to the attacks, and it helps them to respond more quickly, especially state actors. And have we got anything like that on island?
So
If not, I would strongly recommend we do that.
So there's been talk about starting up an ISAC, just to have this type of forum and discussion to share attack patterns, what people are seeing. If there could be, from a bank perspective, if they're attacking one bank, it's very likely they're going to be attacking others as well, because they're just spraying across customer base. Cayman Islands Bankers Association had a discussion regarding with a vendor to try and be the focus point and to localize and get that type of discussion going. But there really hasn't been any progress on that as far as I'm aware. But we've had the discussion before of getting an ISAC or this type of committee involved, even if it's cross sector, just to discuss, because we're a small environment. So if a phishing campaign or something's going on, chances are Butterfield will see it, Kio National will see it, somebody else will see it, and then sharing that information helps protect customers across the board. So it's definitely worth something picking up. I know there's been discussion about it, but I don't think there's been any traction.
If you do that, you have enough critical mass that the other financial centers will let you in.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah. In the States, we had one that was very similar. It was InfraGard, and it was kind of just local chapters to work through. I kind of thought InfraGard was just a total waste of time because it was the government pimping private sector for what their information was and not giving anything back. But I know that as a result of that, there are things like the MITRE and ATT&CK framework for emulating and figuring out, here's a encyclopedia of what these different traits look like to identify whether it's state hacking actors, 615 or a different group, so on and so forth. As far as a local group and a community of experts and subject matter experts, I would love to do that. And I know working with James too, again, this is shameless plugs for B-Sides coming up. We're looking at bringing the first security conference to Cayman. I haven't personally been involved in other B-Sides smaller communities, but I think we could probably look at maybe doing just like a meetup or a road to the big event where we hold monthly or quarterly chat. I think it'd just be good and kind of just let's just brainstorm and just talk and go from there.
That did not sound ominous at all. Oh.
No, that. Big brother aside, yes. Yeah, yeah. You're correct. Right, right. I think we've got one more back there. Going into overtime, boys.
Just to carry on from that, we are a few members short on ISACA. I mean, I know Anil was at one of our ISACA CISSP boot camps. I think we've hosted 2, and we have done a few of the CISSP, CSIMs, and CISMs. And I think we're at about 50 members now for ISACA, and we need a few more because there's a few of us ISACA members who are part of the Jamaica chapter because we don't have enough here in Cayman to do our own chapter. But it's no reason that we couldn't get folks who are members and have our different accreditations get together, and we don't have to create our own chapter to do some of those certs. And I don't mean the certifications, but get our own actual emergency response teams and get off the WhatsApp channels. Not that that isn't great that when we get the phishing attacks, we all just start buzzing away to each other. But I think that, Tom raises a good point. It doesn't take much. We are a village. We really could get a little bit more organized. And it's terrific that we do it at the conferences and we do it here. But I think a little round robin get together, and I'm more than happy to
Yeah, let's
with Charlie's
let's
help,
let's
put
talk
this in.
afterwards. And we
Yeah.
can definitely. I'd like to follow that up with you.
Yeah.
I will as well.
Yeah. Okay. So
Cool, you got 3 for
I'll add
3.
that
3 for
onto the
3.
agenda. All right. Thank you.
Kayla, did we want to ask any of the ones from online or from the? Oh, I think she's back there.
Okay, so we have a question by Gary C. A question for the panel. Any commentary on cyber insurers having paid out more than they drew in premiums last year and how that will impact regulation, practice, and audit?
Wants to go?
I'll take that one. I'll get 2 mics on this. It means that they don't want to give you coverage for anything that you want to do. A lot of it was, and I know this because I have friends that were underwriters for cyber liability specifically. And historically, it was always just kind of a checkbox. Do you want cyber? Yes or no? And you add it in, and it's just added in coverage. But then as it started cascading through that they were paying through the nose for these things, and it was the one time that the insurance companies lost money, they do not like losing money. And so what they've done now is they've come up with a robust set of parameters you have to do. And they're asking for specific coverage on different things, and you may not have the coverage that you need. So for an instance of a phishing email, you might be protected, but if it's the fault of your customer going above it or your employee going above and beyond or not doing what was supposed to be done as far as their acceptable use policy, then you're on the hook for it. And they're very fine lettering the specifics for it on how they're reacting to it. But I get it because it's a risky business. They're insuring against hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases. So I've seen it too when I spoke with a friend of mine who is the underwriter. He said he's had some cases where the insurance will just write it and cut a check, and they're like, "We're basically just black marking you. We're not going to work with you ever again because it's an event." So that's what I've seen.
In my experience, they've come to us with progressively more and more stringent due diligence requests for information. They haven't come out straightforward and said you must be compliant with the standard or anything, but that could be something on the horizon for them as a way of just guaranteeing or trying to hedge their bets that you have a certain baseline of security. I haven't heard about being blacklisted if you get an event or anything like that too. I think that's extreme, but it is a money business. Make no joke about it. So I think that's where it's going to go. If you're going to pay for cyber insurance, which is something, again, your risk appetite has to dictate that. What's your insurer requirements going to be, and then can you meet those requirements to a satisfactory degree? It's insurance. That's what they do.
I think expect more difficulty getting insurance down the line. I think they're going to want you to jump through more hoops, maybe have an IT audit or something like that to understand your infrastructure and probably quantify your risk in greater terms. So they're going to narrow what they'll cover, and they're going to charge you more for it. But I wasn't actually aware of that. I didn't know that there was that many losses last year.
I have one more question from the online group from Nabil. What are your thoughts regarding the inherent risks of using DeFi, hacked smart contract risks to consumers or institutions, and the importance of tamper-proof oracles to mitigate this risk?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in a fringe way that kind of touches on what the analogy would essentially just be the zero trust, like you were talking about before, but as it pertains to blockchain and smart contracts. Smart contract audits are something that I know a lot of organizations are doing, but the problem though is those people are already in the crypto space, which isn't a problem necessarily, but I know that from my time at the accounting firm, we were looking at how we could go through and audit that. The problem though is you essentially need to take someone who has a vested interest and understands both the audit side and also the technical side of implementing those to make sure they're reviewed appropriately. I know there's been a couple different, just an analogy now too, and recently, the latest thing in the NFT space is a lot of different rug pulls, where essentially you're investing, and the smart contract has one of the devs who wasn't publicly doxxed, no one knows who they are, and they essentially just siphon out all the money because they didn't see that they were just able to take it out through the smart contract. They didn't have an audit done. So I think as far as when you're looking at immutable ledgers or oracles and things like that, you're starting getting into that tinfoil hat scenario of your double checks, of your triple checks, of your quadruple checks to make sure that it is essentially just a zero trust. But then I guess you could also take the tinfoil hat on again too, and then say if it's made by a human, it is infallible. So then is it ever going to not be infallible? So just not something to sleep on, but that's a very I don't really have all the answers, but that would be the way I would answer that question.
More security training for developers. Seriously, training is the answer to pretty much everything, I think, tonight. But yeah, better training for devs, I think, is the way to go. Devs are fantastic, but they don't always have the security hat on. They're not always properly trained in that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. In Cayman, SEMA regulates financial entities, financial firms, and attempts to keep an eye on other infrastructures on the island. Nobody seems to be watching the law firms. In your experience, what ideas would you come up with to keep an eye on the law firms' infrastructure to help us against Panama Papers? We can ignore Maples and Calder because I'm pretty sure they're locked up, but the medium-sized law firms, the smaller law firms, they're the concern.
Yeah, this is another area. You not looking to get one more. No, yeah, I would say, is this on? No. Exactly what Anil said is the point. Is the law firms that are interested in elevating their security posture are going to, but then the rest of them aren't because there's no impetus or reason for them to do so. I would venture a guess and say that the data protection law or the data protection act that it was enacted here in Cayman is going to have a version 2.0 because they specifically worded it to target data custodians. And at that point, I think once that gets some teeth and becomes a GDPR light or a Cayman's GDPR version, then there will be some regulatory requirements for that point. But unfortunately, regulation drives what that baseline is. So it's great if you're the one of ones and are doing everything you need to for it and striving for those that boutique and great cybersecurity posture, but until they're required to do it, you're going to be kind of standing on your own for it.
I got so much to say. It is a case for, like we've been saying for a while, there's a business driver for a law firm as well to protect their own integrity and protect their data as well. Nobody wants to do business with a law firm that's been breached or can't be shown to be to have the integrity of their data. So that should be a driver in the back of their minds as well. Whether they want to take the cost to go and do a full-on official certification like ISO, it's up to them. Well, at least Cyber Essentials Plus, there are a number of other smaller baselines that they can work with, or frameworks that they can work with to show that they are at least aiming towards a certain level of control. But it's up to them really, and that to me would be a main business driver there. What's the risk if we get a data breach or data exposure? Then we lose customers and we lose business. So.
The one thing I did just think about too is specifically for law firms, there has been a big push on outsourced or boutique software for law firms specifically. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. A lot of those software companies are focusing on the compliance of regulatory requirements, what the statute of limitations is for keeping specific customer client data. And so as part of that, a lot of those applications or backends that are working on the law firms, those are going through the ISO processes. They're going through the SOC 2s to make sure that that data is tied up, because you're quite right. Nobody wants to work with a law firm that's been breached. Nobody wants to work with a law firm with any company that's been breached. My local shop that I went to for my grocery was Target in the US. And then I thought twice about which credit card I was going to use when I was in there swiping my cards afterwards. So that's a good point. So there's no requirement, but there's a lot of little steps that you can do to help keep yourself secure. So everybody's ready to go drink, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to thank our speakers for their time, for sharing their expertise, our sponsors, Kirk ISS, Digital Cayman, and CEC. If you have any questions at all about your memberships, Digital Cayman memberships that we offer, we have a lot of information on our website. But if you have any immediate questions, please feel free to come to me. My name is Daniela, or email me at mail@digitalcayman.com. Feel free to stay for a while. Thank you for coming.